Kia ora and good afternoon and welcome to this extraordinary meeting of Horowhenua District Council. It is extraordinary in a number of ways. Mayor Bernie is isolating and at home and is joining us remotely via Zoom. So he has vacated the chair, and so I sit in the chair today for this meeting. The reason he's vacated the chair really is for the challenges that would present with chairing remotely and managing the table as one person on Zoom. So with that said, I welcome everybody, officers of council, councillors, and I will introduce our Waiata group shortly, members of the public and speakers who are here. Councillor Kitu, can I invite you to open today for us with karakia?
Tēnā koe, Deputy Mayor Joe Mason, mō te wihi ki a koutou, kei rau te koro wai o tō tātou whare, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. E tino miharo, whakahirehira tēnei ki tēnei rā, te tauhau o matariki, hei mua i a tātou. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi aro ki a koutou, ki aro tātou katoa. Ki noi tātou. E te atu e tā kaharawa, kei te whakamoe me te mātou ki a koe tēnei rā. Nau mai hara mai, ka wāngere te koro wai o matariki, hei mua i a koe. Uhia mai te koro wai, aroha, me te manaakitanga, te awhina tanga o tātou, kei raro te koro wai aroha o tātou ariki, ai hokorai te tōki tō mātou ariki. Āmene. Kia ora tātou.
Āmene, kia ora, Councillor Kitu. And a really warm Matariki welcome to everybody. It is our special celebration of Matariki, and for that reason we are blessed with the presence of Horowhenua District Council's Waiata group, who at very short notice have whipped themselves into action. Although they practice every Tuesday at 8:30, feel free to join them. It's a very uplifting experience. Welcome, and we are going to have the Waiata Matariki e ara ea. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Matariki, matariki, e ara e matahi o te tau, te koinga petu I te o mao, rangi nuri, e piri aka tamai ana, waka tai te rangi, e tohu ana I te taua mari e. Tupu anaku, ko tupu arangi ko waiti waita. Waipuna rangi e. Tupu anaku, ko tupu arangi ko waiti waita. Waipuna rangi e. Kopo utu kawae, kohi wai te rangi e. Matariki e ae, te matahi o te tau, te koinga petu I te o mao, rangi nui, e piri aka tamai ana, waka tatai rangi, e tohu wana I te kaua mai e. Tupu anaku, ko tupu anaku, ko tupu warangi, ko waiti waita. Wai puna rangi, rangi e. Tupu anaku, ko tupu warangi, ko waiti waita. Wai puna rangi, rangi e. Ko utu kawae, ko hiwa I te rangi e. Matariki e ara e. Matariki, matariki, matariki e ara e.
Thank you to the Waiata group. Awesome, and good luck this evening. They're off to more marvellous Matariki events tonight, and they continue over the next couple of weeks. Okay, it's now to call for apologies. No apologies? There are no apologies today. Now, I just need to read out a procedural matter before we move into public participation. So I just want to note, fellow councillors, that I'll be declaring a conflict of interest on item 8.1, proposed plan change for Taraika Growth Area, adoption of decisions of the Independent Hearings Panel. The reason for my conflict is that I was a member of the Independent Hearings Panel. We have a public speaker wishing to speak to item 8.1, Mr. Charles Rudd. And as I am declaring a conflict of interest in this item, I cannot chair the meeting during public speaking in relation to this item, as well as the substantive item on the agenda. So, however, before I leave the chair for this public participation item, we need to go through the process of electing a chairperson to chair the meeting for those two separate parts of the meeting today. So, the procedure for electing a chair are set out in our standing orders, in Standing Order 5.6. So before we can proceed to elect a chair, councillors must vote on which system will be used to elect the chair. And councillors will note that we foreshadowed this with an email giving you some information last evening. So I'll ask the Democracy Advisor, Grayson, to read out Standing Order 5.6, which sets out the options.
Standing Order 5.6, voting system for chairs, deputy mayors and committee chairs. When electing a regional council chair, a deputy mayor or a committee chair, the local authority must resolve to use one of the following two voting systems. System A. The candidate will be elected or appointed if she or he receives the votes of the majority of the members of the local authority or committee who are present and voting. This system has the following characteristics. A. There is a first round of voting for all candidates. B. If no candidate is successful in the first round, there is a second round of voting from which the candidate with the fewest votes in the first round is excluded. And C. If no candidate is successful in the second round, there is a third round, and if necessary, subsequent rounds of voting from which each time the candidate with the fewest votes in the previous round is excluded. In any round of voting, if two or more candidates tie for the lowest number of votes, the person to be excluded from the next round is resolved by lot. Or, System B. The candidate will be elected or appointed if he or she receives more votes than any other candidate. This system has the following characteristics. There is only one round of voting, and B, if two or more candidates tie for the most votes, the tie is resolved by lot.
Thank you, Mr. Rouse. Are there any questions in relation to the voting systems? None? Okay. So we'll use a show of hands for adopting either system A or B. And I will be abstaining from voting simply because of my pre-declared conflict. So those who vote for system A, please raise your hand. Those who vote for system B, please raise your hands. Okay, Mayor Burney on screen has raised his hand, so that's system B has been adopted. Sorry? Okay. So, system A will be used. So I now open the table and invite nominations. System B. Ooh, system B, get this right. It was an extraordinary meeting. I invite for system B nominations from the table, and you may self-nominate and no seconder is required. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Could I nominate Councillor Allen, please?
Are there any other nominations?
I was going to nominate Councillor Allen too, so I don't need to, obviously. I'll second that, thank you.
All those in favour? Oh, Councillor Keto, my apologies.
Sorry, so that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Allen, you have been nominated to take the chair. You're happy to accept that? Okay, we can proceed. So, thank you. I will now vacate the chair for item 2 on the agenda. And then I'll be vacating again for item 8.1. So,
Kia ora, could I welcome Charles Rudd to speaking to item 8.1? Welcome, Charles. And just before you speak, we have a question from Councillor Jennings.
I understand it was certainly my intention, and I understand it's also Councillor Isaac's intention to declare a conflict of interest also in respect of item 8.1. So I just wondered whether you wanted us to do that now, given so I think that might just be so just consistent with previous declarations around this particular aspect. Wanted to declare a conflict of interest. I was a submitter in relation to the district plan change, so I won't be participating in item 8.1.
Pretty much exactly what Councillor Jennings said. Same, I was also a submitter and I would like to declare a conflict as well. So.
Thank you, Councillor Isaacs and Councillor Jennings. Over to you, Charles.
Kia ora e te iwi. Me ngā mihi o Matariki, te tauhou Māori ki a tātou katoa, ngā mihi. Te he Māori ora. Kura o whakapāke te now, that means I'll speak in English. Think seriously what I'm going to inform you all. It does not matter if it's governance or operations of council, because there are and will be ramifications and consequences to decisions that have and will be made. What is logic? What is common sense? What is ignorance? What is arrogance? The answer is in the question. Whether you are stuck in a rut, the answer is the same. It's a paradox. I'm not here to castigate or lay blame to anyone here. That is for you to look deep within yourselves. But I'm here to highlight the erroneous errors of this tairaka issue on the agenda, tabled with a threat to the submitters. That is why I'm here. Because I have questions to the document that's been talked about tonight, maybe talked about tonight. The question is, why didn't the commissioners send out a copy of their decisions on this issue to the submitters at least 3 weeks prior to today's agenda? That's how it should have went. It didn't. How many submitters were not informed of this issue being presented on today's agenda item? I only see 2 of us, or maybe a couple more. Everyone has the right to appeal obtuse decisions made, and any intended subliminal threat given to submitters is where people power comes to the fore as a response to those who have the kaha to do so. What I'm saying in that document, there is a threat. If you don't like it, take us to the Environment Court. That is a threat. In the end, it will be mud on someone's face as an apology will not suffice. I'm speaking about accountability, credibility, integrity and transparency to your ratepayers and others. That's what I'm saying to whoever has made this mess. Example to what I'm talking about is on the next agenda item. Report to the Council on the order of the Horowhenua District Council for the year ended 30th of June 2021. Now that audit report is telling you people a lot of things. Well, what I'm saying about this tairaka is the same sort of thing. And in saying that, respect to you, Monique, for you have inherited a big mess to mop up, such as tairaka, live and landfill, and many other issues. You have a lot of issues on your plate. And I say to you, Monique, kia kaha, tukaha, kia kaha. Stand strong, be strong in your work, your mahi, and your endeavours. The wonder of you. Apiti hono tata hono mata kite hono mata. Apiti hono tata hono ora kite hono. Kia ora tātou, kati.
Kia ora, Charles. Are there any questions of Mr. Rudd? Councillor Ketu?
Tēnā koe te rangatira mo te kōrero. Whāriki nei i tō tātou kaunehere aimu i a koe. E pātai tuatahi. E pātai mo te document. Can you give me a brief of that document you referred to? What that?
Well, there's a lot of things. The commissioners in the items were very erroneous on a lot of matters. There was a lot of things not to what the many submitters put in, weren't answered properly by the commissioners at all. It's a mess. And so it's a threat to put down, if you don't like it, take us to the Environment Court. Well, I would say there's going to be a few taking it to the Environment Court, looking at the document. I mean, I read one part there with the Horowhenua Ratepayers Association was asking questions. Kupu, questions. Hip partai. And they were all rejected. Okay. They were asking questions. So if someone's asked you a question, you've got to answer it. Not reject it. Yeah. Correct?
Any further questions? There appears to be none. Thank you for your submission.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Welcome back to the table, Councillor Jennings, Councillor Isaacs. We now move to item 3 on the agenda, late items, and we need to introduce to the open agenda, open late item that will be 8.2A1, receiving the report and the letter of endorsement on the detailed business case for Otaki to North Levin Highway. So that is a late item for the agenda. Okay. So what I need is a mover and a seconder to Councillor Allen, Councillor Jennings. All those in favour? Aye. To accept this report. This is a late report and it needs to be accepted today and decided on today to ensure that it accompanies the detailed business case of Wakatahi. So we will deal with that item at the end of the agenda. So we move on now to agenda item 4, and we have partially done this, but are there any other declarations of interest in relation to today's agenda? Just confirming on 8.1, there is myself, there is Councillor Isaacs and Councillor Jennings. Any other conflicts of interest in relation to this agenda today? Okay, no further declarations of interest. Are there any announcements? Agenda item 5. No announcements, and today we don't have any proceedings of committees as per agenda item 6. So we move to reports, and we move to agenda item 7, and the adoption of the rates resolution for the year ending 30th of June 2023. And Mrs. Straka is going to introduce this report. Mrs. Straka, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I want to explain the report in detail. It is really the result of all of the decision making that you've made over the last mostly 6 months in relation to setting the annual plan, and this is effectively taking effect to that. And so these rates will be set in the system this month and will go out to ratepayers as part of next financial year.
Thank you. Councillor Allen, did you?
Just to move receipt of the report.
Okay. So, do I have a mover for the report? Oh, yeah. Councillor Allen, seconded Councillor Bishop. So we have received the report. We have had an introduction of the report from Mrs. Straka, and the purpose of this report before us with the recommendation on page 8 of our agenda, starting at item 2 recommendation and moving through to page 12, is moved to Councillor Allen, seconded Councillor Bishop. Are there any questions or points of clarification that councillors would like to seek from the reporting officer or the chief executive? That being the case, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Oh.
Receipt of it.
So the report is essentially the recommendations. Okay, right, for clarity, we will ask for a mover for the recommendations on page 8, starting at 2 recommendations and moving through to page 12. So, Councillor Allen, and a seconder, Councillor Kay Simmons. That any discussion, points of clarification? Councillor Tupou.
Yeah, so obviously this is just the formality or adopting the rates increase that we obviously accepted last public meeting. As a summary for the public, can you, that might have missed last meeting and only listening to this one, outline exactly what the rates revenue are? I mean, from memory it's 47 million. We're increasing rates by 7%. You gave us a table, I'm not sure the public have seen it, how that looks across different parts of the district, within Foxton, wherever. But if you could outline what that means, and that it's not 7% for everyone, it's, yeah, do you know what I mean? Summarise it, and then understanding that this is just how it's broken down is what we're looking at today.
That's fine.
Targeted or-
Sure. I might just grab some notes from my desk. So in general, the rates increase overall is at 7%. That includes, though, if you look at the total dollar in terms of a rates increase, that sits at 8.7%. And in terms of why we talk about an average rates increase, that's because our district has grown in this last year by 1.7%, which is approximately 340 or 350 properties. And what that means is then there's 350 more properties that will share that rates increase. So what the average household across the district should experience is approximately 7%. But of course that differs across the district because we have different types of rates. So for example, the general rate has actually gone down this year. And so where a property, for example, has a lower land value, then they won't experience as much of that decrease as would a property with a high land value. As well, an example is our solid waste rate, for example, that has increased significantly, and that is because we have increased costs of transporting our waste to Bonnie Glen and also the increased cost of managing the solid waste activity. This council, as part of the conversation in terms of finalising the annual plan, made a decision to limit that rates increase to $450,000 for this year, and then have conversations about how that funding will be recovered over time. But when you look at the solid waste activity in itself, those rates have increased significantly. So depending on the different types of rates and the services will depend on the different increases that an individual household will experience. But what we've tried to do in the annual plan document itself is detail where those increases are, so people can look at those examples and have a look at what the impact is for them. If there are any questions or concerns about individual properties between now and when people receive their first rates invoice, they're more than welcome to email the rates inbox or to call the council, and we can give them an actual rates increase in terms of their individual properties. We will as well, in terms of rates rebates, we are trying really hard to make sure that everyone that's eligible for a rates rebate, which is up to $600, so it's a significant amount, we will be including that application in with all rates invoice, the first rates assessment and rates invoices, to try and encourage everyone that can apply to apply. So hopefully that will help those families that will be struggling, that are already struggling and will be struggling as part of this rates increase as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Keto.
Could you clarify for me, the rates increase for some areas like Tokomaru, Shannon, and how that is already worked out in terms of that increase? Like I think Tokomaru is around 8%, something like that. Could you clarify how that all worked out, please?
Sure. So in areas such as Tokomaru, for example, the land value proportionately, if you look at the land value in that area relative to the rest of the district, or in central living, for example, would be lower proportionately to Tokomaru. So that would mean that the general rate, for example, that has reduced as part of this annual plan setting, they would not. That is not as big a portion of their rate as would be our fixed charges. So, for example, our library rate, our representation and governance rate, and our aquatics rates are based on fixed charges. So where you have a property that's not worth as much in terms of land value and capital value, then for some of those areas, the rates increase may be more than in areas where that is higher. And that is because the general rate has reduced, but our fixed charges are tending to increase at a higher rate than as other ones. It is important to note that as part of signing off this annual plan, you've given clear signal as part of the long-term plan as well that you wish to do a rates review. And so some of the conversations here are where, because this council has a significant portion of its rates that are charged on a fixed basis, then as part of the rates review, you'll have an opportunity to look at those rates and decide whether you want to look at moving some of those to land value or capital value, for example. And that will affect the way that the rates are shared across the district. So that's something that absolutely can be looked at as part of the rates review going forward.
Could I just ask you to explain, for some of our constituents in those areas, like Tokomaru, how they could seek some assistance if their rates they can't manage their rates and things like that. Is there something that we have in place to assist them because of that? Because I'm thinking about some of the constituents that within the Tokomaru area. They don't have library services, pool services. They don't go. They don't get their rubbish collected or recycling collected, yet they're still quite high in terms of their rate. There must be some sort of a assistance that we're able to give to them. Can you talk about that, please?
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair. There is currently, in terms of the policy, the remission policy, there's not specific assistance in terms of from an affordability perspective, but that is absolutely something that could be considered as part of the rates review. In terms of the rates rebate, though, which is provided by the central government, absolutely anything that we can do as a council to help make sure that everyone that's eligible for that up to $600 payment can receive it.
Thank you, Mrs. Drucker. Councillor Kiru, perhaps you could take this conversation offline and invite any members that approach you to contact council officers. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Can I just ask, when is the information going to be available on the council website where people can go and look at what their rates for the next financial year are going to be?
So we're hoping to have everything struck by the 18th in the system, so that's the intention. So there will be a little bit of a delay between the 1st of July and the 18th, but absolutely we'll be able to answer the questions. We just won't have it readily available for the whole district.
No further questions. We'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Abstaining? So, can we have a show of hands? All those in favour? Against? Abstaining? Against? Abstain? Was that abstaining? Against, okay. Motion is moved.
Just, Madam Chair, sorry, I know the motion's been put, but there was not the opportunity for debate. I don't know whether...
My apologies, Councillor Allen.
Would it be in order just to hold in case councillors wanted to...
We can take debate, my apologies.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion or debate? Councillor Bishop.
Thank you. I'd like to speak to the reason why I put my hand up for against, and it's not just because I don't agree with the process or how we've got there. For those of you around the table, you well know my position, but those maybe here listening or online may not have heard the underline, and I'm looking forward to next year where we have, I think, a chance to run this process in a different light, where we put our revenue and finance policy in its rightful place, which is more at the front end of this process, I think, rather than writing it almost to fit what falls out of a program which has been brought. 8.7% doesn't sit comfortably with me. It's above where my natural comfort level is, and that's long held view. And I still share that today, certainly in these times where our community is facing huge increases across the board as far as upwards pressure on their affordability. Their disposable income has been eaten into. And I do need to make mention that also that I'm concerned going forward where we've got this $30 million of carry forward of work that we didn't carry out this year up until the end of this month. And I know that's going to be spread across a number of years in the future. Really hard, I think, for the table, whatever that makeup is, come November, to try and properly keep track of all that and how that's going to be presented is going to be a real challenge for this council. And I look forward to the review of that long-term plan next year, where I hope that a number of things that have been dealt with in a less than ideal way will be ironed out, and I look forward to, if I'm lucky enough to retain the seat, supporting it next year.
Thank you, Councillor Bishop. In retrospect, any other councillors wish to speak to the item that we formally voted on? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, look, I was a bit slow out of the blocks last week in relation to the decision making around the annual plan, and had some things that I wanted to say in voting against the annual plan and the level of rate increase. But I was, as I say, a bit slow. So thank you for the opportunity to sort of capture some of that tonight. And I guess it's pretty simple from my perspective, which is I didn't agree with the level of rates that we had set through the long-term plan over a year ago. So I didn't support it then, and I still don't support the level of increase now. And I guess I reflect on, and in the annual plan itself, I think we used a median, the median rateable property of a live-in-based property of land value of 180,000 and capital value of 400,000. And so in practice, that property is actually going to see a 9.3% increase in terms of the table that's been produced to us. And I know that there's obviously some adjustment then for growth. But I guess the impact of the level of the rates increase is what concerns me for our community, and so that's why I voted against it. I'm very much looking forward to, again, like Councillor Bishop, if I'm fortunate enough to be around this table, I'm looking forward to the process of the LTP amendment next year. Hopefully we can see the results of that zero-based budgeting approach that certainly I've been championing for a number of years. I think that will allow us to really look at that cost to serve, that cost of service, and also potentially allow us to have some tough conversations around our levels of service, so that we can see if there are opportunities to, I guess, keep that rate increase, which seems to have become a perpetual annual thing where we just keep throwing on more and more rate increase, and obviously our households are not seeing the level of increase in their household income. So look, that's essentially why I'm voting against, why I voted against the annual plan and why I'm voting against this item tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Are there any other speakers in retrospect to the vote? Thank you. Pardon? Oh, Mayor Burney.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies for not being there in person today, but unfortunately I am isolating. Look, I just want to speak in support of these recommendations. I know that 7% sounds a lot in the context of 1 year, but when you actually look at it in over a 3-year period, we are actually below an average of 5% for the 3 years when you take into the account the minus 1.83% that we had 2 years ago. So I think in terms of what has happened within this country over the last 3 years, to be able to give that sort of figure, which is now below the inflation rate, I think signals that we are being careful, efficient and effective and prudent in terms of where we're going with our rates. The expectation that our community has now for services of delivery has been high and will continue to be high. So we have to make sure that we do put the measures in place that we can deliver those services the best we can. We've highlighted the fact that our infrastructure needs the major portion of the work that we're going to be doing over the next 12 months, and I think that's appropriate in the coming 12 months. So I too look forward to the review of the revenue and finance policy. I think it will help us set a new platform for the way we go forward. But at present, I do support these recommendations.
Thank you. From remote Zoom land, Mayor Burney. Councillor Keter, your light is on. Did you wish to speak?
Yes, I know that you advised to take my conversation offline with the officers, but I just wanted to say that, you know, my constituents are concerned about that high rate compounding interest that's happening, so I'm going to be voting against it.
So you'd like to record your vote as against? Okay, the motion is still carried. Thank you, Councillor Keter. Right, we now move on to item 7.2 of the agenda and the reports. And item 7.2 is a follow-up request to officers, and I believe Mrs. Straka is speaking to this as well. And the item before us is Local Elections Signage Policy 2022, additional signage locations in Live-in Ward. Do I have a mover for recommendations 2.1 and 2.2? Councillor Jennings, Councillor Isaacs. Do I have to say all those in favour? All those in favour? Carried. Mrs. Straka, we're in your hands. I believe you are subbing in from Soria tonight, who is also away.
My apologies, yeah, Ashley is unwell, so apologies, it wasn't in my head to sit down today. So in regards to this paper, we Ashley and the rest of the officers did do some work to look at alternate sites, so those that we've indicated there today are what have been suggested for you. So in terms of the detail, Mr. Nelson, I'm not sure if he's here today, not here, but in terms of specific questions, hopefully we'll be able to answer any that you might have. But I'm happy to take questions at this stage.
Are there any questions? No. Okay. Councillor Tukapua.
Yeah, I just appreciate the work you've undertaken, because obviously I raised the point about many candidates, a new Māori warden, and just all sort of not going to fit on the village green. So thank you for that. I just wondered, I'm conscious, though these don't really go up till about September, October, do they? I guess my thinking is we talk about youth engaging in local government or having some sort of understanding, and while there isn't civic education in schools around enrolling to vote and how it all works. Sometimes when there's a cluster of signage up, it may get their attention and stimulate conversations that they wouldn't necessarily have otherwise. And a place like, I thought, perhaps Donnelly Park, only because obviously it's got a big green space, but there's so many sports that happen over there: netball, soccer, hockey, cricket. Be quite a lot of comings and goings and visibility potentially for that younger generation just to be exposed to it. That's just a thought, but otherwise happy with your 3 recommended sites out of the list. Did you take that into consideration maybe around young people and the exposure of like that particular site?
Thank you, Sam.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. Look, I don't think that was considered, Councillor Tukupoa. I think you raise a good point, though. I do wonder, though, whether there are other avenues in which we can think about how young people can engage in the conversation. And obviously, through Local Government New Zealand, there's some great tools around kids and youth voting programs. And I'm not saying that we're in a position to implement all of that, but I think there's certainly some work we can do to help embrace the conversation across our wider community. So we'll take that as an action if you're comfortable with that.
Are there any more questions? Okay, so we now move on to the next recommendation, which is recommendation 2.3, that Council adopts and the options are live-in Ward Map 5 and or live-in Ward Map 6 and or live-in Ward Map 7, live-in ward signage locations or location for inclusion in the local election signage policy. Do I have anybody who wants to recommend? Can you just be clear what all? So you are moving that we include live-in Ward Map 5, live-in Ward Map 6 and live-in Ward Map 7 in the recommendation? Councillor Tukupoa, is there a second? Councillor Jennings?
I just wanted to mention it's very northeast heavy. That's all when I look at those. Live-in Domain would have been probably, I would have been in support of, but I probably wouldn't have been in support of all of them.
We have a recommendation before us and we did have questions earlier. Okay, we're open for debate now. Is there any debate on this matter? Is that's your debate that it's not? Okay. What do I need to do? Okay. Is there anyone else wants to speak to this item? Okay, I'll put the vote.
Sorry.
Apologies, Mayor Burney.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'd actually like to speak against this. I don't believe we need any more vacant pieces of land polluted by ugly signs in a 3-month period around town. I think there's enough space in the centre of town there that would be sufficient. I'm also very conscious that there are a lot more other ways of advertising people's brands these days rather than just hoardings in different places, and there are a lot more opportunities on either private land or whatever to do that as well. I'm also conscious that candidates may feel obligated to actually put their hoardings up on those sites, which to me means that they will only be adding cost to a campaign which is already probably reasonably expensive anyway for some. So for those reasons, I'm actually going to vote against this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Burney. Any other speakers to this matter? So we have a mover, Councillor Tukupoa. We have a seconder, Councillor Jennings, that the council adopts and includes the 3 map areas in live-in ward signage, remembering that this item was just for live-in ward signage because we had dealt with all of the signage for the other areas at the last council meeting. So I now put the recommendation 2.3 and all those in favour? Against? Okay, the motion is carried. (2022) remits. This is something that we do every year, and the purpose of this report is to seek direction from Council on which votes are to be cast for the remits at the Local Government New Zealand Annual General Meeting 2022, and to appoint voting delegates for the Annual General Meeting at Local Government New Zealand. So, do I have a mover and seconder for recommendation 2.1, 2.2?
Yeah, I was going to lump in 2.3 and 2.4 actually.
You want to do that? You
yeah.
want to move 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4 in block?
Yeah, if
So,
others are comfortable.
Councillor Jennings is moving that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Allen. Do I have to ask any questions of that? Okay, are there any questions in relation to those recommendations? Any?
Thank you. I was wondering if we had any officers' views on remit number 2, which is a review of the Waka Kotahi funding model.
Councillor Mitchell, can we hold that question until we get to that agenda item? Are there any questions in relation to the 4 recommendations before us? So I put those recommendations. All those in favour? Councillor Tupua.
Apologies, just a clarification. So, yeah, I will be supporting that, but those other councillors who we've approved to attend the conference, are they allowed to just sit in the back of that AGM?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, the AGM's actually not been held at the same time as conference this year. It's 2 weeks separate. So we'll be able to invite all councillors to come in and enjoy the AGM here, virtually on Zoom.
There you go, Councillor Tupua. Okay, no further questions. So I put recommendations 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4. All those in favour? Against? Councillor Mayor Burney is voting again. Voting for? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Bear with me. Okay. Thank you. So right. We have before us the remits, and Councillor Mitchell, you have questions in relation to them. My understanding is that there hadn't been any questions or clarity prior to the meeting. There are 5 remits. So I guess if we move through each remit, which start at 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8 to 2.9, and move through each remit with first, I'll just so we will take them. Would you like to have questions about the remits prior to the recommendations? I think we might do that. Okay, so we'll start with questions on the remits.
Yeah, 2.5 remit 1, I've got 2 queries. The first is like within the attached documentation, it doesn't provide the amount or the cost of to government, or therefore taxpayers, what it would be to provide free public transport. So that's, and I don't expect anyone here would have the answer because I imagine it's quite huge. And then the second thing is the group that is, I guess, advocating for this. There is no background to or idea or suggestion of how that might be funded or how they might recommend government look at that, because it's either to do this, taxes have to go up to pay for it, or you take from one activity to apply it to this new thing. And what is that? I want to know what the trade-off is, or what they're. And without that information, I'm just saying it's difficult for me to. Yeah.
So to answer your question, Councillor Tukapo, no, we don't have that information either.
So what we're seeking here is for Mayor Burney to have guidance on how the table would like him to vote in relation to these remits. So if there are no more, there are more questions on 2.5, Councillor Mitchell?
Okay, so we're questioning as we go.
I think we'll question as we go, yeah. So for 2.5, the remit is that Local Government New Zealand calls on central government to fully and permanently fund free public transport for students, community service card holders, under 25s and total mobility card holders and their support people, and joins the Aotearoa Collective for Public Transport Equity, ACPTE, in support of the Free Fares campaign. We're going to call for a vote individually. Okay. Right, so.
I was actually going to propose to start us off by moving that in relation to 2.5, that we vote against that remit.
Is there a seconder? Oh, Councillor Bishop, you're the seconder. Okay. So the recommendation is that we vote against. All those in. Okay, let's do that.
Can we just briefly speak to it? I'm not going to take very long.
You can speak to it, Councillor.
Yeah, which I just think, as Councillor Tukua has outlined, I think the policy background to this is a bit flimsy. For me, the key thing that would be needed to support something like this is to actually understand what the benefits and implications for our community are. As a community that doesn't have a lot of public transport, this for me feels like it has a central government or potential central government bias towards those larger cities, and actually I think that would be to our detriment potentially. So yeah, I'd want more robust policy analysis around this before I can support it.
Look, I'm going to support the motion on the table, but I just want to say that we're getting ourselves, I think, into a state of confusion, because by supporting that, we're supporting being against that. And could I suggest with the rest of the remits that we speak to them and then simply vote for or against to avoid confusion?
We pretty much decided that, Councillor Allen, that's how it goes. So,
just
but do you want to continue with your?
I'm happy at your discretion, however you want to move with this. I just want to be able to speak to each of some of the. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Bishop, are you happy if we just take it around the table? It's been spoken to by Councillor Jennings. Anybody else wishing to speak to it? Okay, we'll move around the table. We'll start with you, Mayor Wandin. Are you in favour, against, or abstaining from item 2.5? What's your preference?
I'm actually against this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Brannigan?
Against.
Jennings?
Against.
Tukapua?
Against.
Allen?
Against.
Ketu? Councillor Isaacs?
Against.
Kay Simmons?
Against.
Bishop?
Against.
Against.
And I'm against. Okay, we'll move on to 2.6, that council. we need to adjourn the meeting for the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee at 4 o'clock, but do you want to quickly proceed with this item and then take an adjournment? Yeah. Okay. 2.6. That council votes in favour, against or abstains from the remit that Local Government New Zealand call for an independent review into the way in which government through Waka Kotahi fund transport investments in Aotearoa. This includes funding of new developments and maintenance programs. Does anybody want to speak to this?
Can I please just ask officers what their point of view would be about this? Do you have one?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I think probably the only advice I'd provide to council is that we obviously have a clear signal through the next government policy statement that how transport is funded across New Zealand and what that might mean for rural provincial councils could be challenging for us. And so, Mayor Burney and Deputy Mayor Mason can probably speak to the narrative in Wellington when we're with our colleagues from across the sector, but investment from Waka Kotahi seems to be a common concern across local government right now.
I was just briefly going to say that I'm not a huge fan of this remit, and there's a number of reasons for that, which was that on the one hand we're saying in the context of Three Waters that the NZTA funding model is a good model that we should be looking at for councils in relation to Three Waters infrastructure. And secondly, we have a future for local government review that's ongoing, that's looking into the role and function and financing of local government. So for me, this is just probably another review that is premature in terms of the sequencing of things that are going on. So I'm not in favour of it at this stage.
Yeah, I guess it's a be careful what you wish for type of a scenario, because recently when we've had a recent rejig of our funding, our percentage actually went up, and you'd hate to go through all the pain of review and have it come down. But maybe if Entity C delivers voting in the future with all that's promised, we could be onto a real win there.
Okay, thank you. Now, so could you signal as we go around the table whether you're in favour, against or abstain from this remit? Start with you, Councillor Brannigan. Against? Okay.
Against.
Against?
Against?
Against.
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 Mayor Wandon?
I'll take the consensus direction from the table.
As will I. We move to 2.7, that council votes in favour, against or abstains from Remit 3, that Local Government New Zealand implement a nationwide working party of subject matter experts with the objective of formulating an action plan to effectively enforce the Land Transport Act 1998 and work with police to tackle illegal street racing and the antisocial behaviour associated with it. Councillor Brannigan.
Yes, quickly to totally support this. This has become a scourge of our communities, and there's not much deterrence at the moment being put in front of these people that do this, and even in small communities, you have to drive around and see the burnout marks everywhere, every intersection you come to. It's become a real scourge of our communities, so anything that is looking at making that more difficult for these antisocial offenders to do, I think we should support.
Thank you, Councillor Brannigan. Councillor Allen.
And just to add to that, I also support it. It's about a cross-boundary approach, so looking at it nationally rather than within separate little pockets of local government. So I support it.
I take a slightly different view. I think that we should look at local solutions for local problems. We've got an understanding of the problem, and for me, at a local level, this is about yes, it's about enforcement. It's about working with police to use the tools that they already have in their toolbox. We've obviously already got legislation that is targeted at this particular activity, but for me, it's about solutions at a local level around giving people who are motor enthusiasts and who like cars and who like motorbikes and all those kind of things a space to do what they need to do or want to do as a valid recreational activity, not on our public roads. But yeah, so I'm not in favour of this remit.
Councillor Bishop.
Yeah, look, this is not a local issue for me, this is a national issue. And we get the finger pointed, local government get the finger pointed at us often from central government to say you're not doing your job right. Look, there's three fingers pointing back at them in this instance to do your job. Fund the police, put the right policies throughout the country to get it sorted, because how do we police this? You know, this has got to be sitting fairly and squarely in the police's lane, and it just needs some desire from central government to put in place some policies and put some funding behind it so it's policed properly. That's where my view sits.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, and I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Bishop. I think it's a police resourcing matter. They simply don't have the resources to be able to deal with it, and we certainly don't. Although I do have some sympathy for providing local solutions for people that want to do that sort of thing. There's just nowhere for people to go who want to ride their bikes or their cars in off-road situations.
Thank you for that spirited bidding. Can we please then go around the table? I'll start with you, Councillor Mitchell, and indicate where you sit.
Against?
Against.
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 I'm against. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Can I just, for the purpose of clarification, are you against Local Government New Zealand implementing a nationwide working group of subject matter experts? You're against that. You're against the remit. Okay, thank you. Councillor Keto.
Against.
Against. Councillor Allen.
In favour.
In favour. Councillor Tukapua.
Against.
Councillor Jennings.
Against.
Councillor Brannigan. You're in favour. Mayor Burney.
In favour.
And I'm in favour. So we will be voting against that at. Okay, 2.8. That council votes in favour, against, or abstains from remit 4, which is that Local Government New Zealand lobby government to implement an infringement notice regime for general bylaws. Are there any speakers to this before we vote?
Just say in favour.
Okay, we'll start with you. Any other speakers? No, Councillor Mitchell.
I would just like some officer advice as whether they think this is sensible. Do we have a problem with implementing our bylaws? Do we need an infringement policy?
Through the Deputy Mayor, yes, is the answer.
And I think, Councillor Mitchell, that was highlighted when we adopted the smoke-free, vape-free policy last week, that we didn't put any bylaws beside it because enforcement is difficult. So I will ask that we move around the room. I'll start with you, Councillor Mitchell. 2.8, your position?
4.
4. Councillor
In favour.
Councillor Victoria K. Simmons.
Support.
Isaacs.
In favour.
Councillor Keto.
In favour.
Councillor Allen.
In favour.
Councillor
In favour.
Councillor Jennings.
In favour.
Councillor Brannigan.
It's all right. Well, I'll go in favour as well.
Mayor Wandon.
In favour.
And I'm in favour as well. And we move to the last item of this recommendation, 2.9, that Local Government New Zealand requests the government to restrict the sale of vaping products to R18 specialist vape stores, develop proximity limits to prevent the clustering of vaping product retailers, and protect young people. Is there any discussion on this remit? Councillor Jennings.
Again, just very briefly, I think the policy case in support of this remit is flimsy. In particular, I don't believe that the proximity limits is, for me, just stupid, because actually proximity and having clustering of these types of stores would actually make it easier to enforce and easier to monitor activity and perceived antisocial behaviour that is associated with presumably associated with these venues, which is what the basis of the policy argument seems to be. So I'm against this remit.
Any others wishing to speak to this remit? Okay, we will move around. Councillor Tupuko, my apologies.
Yeah, well, while vaping is, or as we know it, is less detrimental to your health than smoking, I must say there is a known problem in schools where a lot of that is happening, and for those students who don't vape, it's quite, I guess a problem that's been brought to my attention by young people and their parents due to the youth work that I'm involved in through council and other means. But so the proximity, yes, because it is quite glitzy. I mean, if you've noticed the vape shop, they're very much bright and appealing and attractive, and at the end of the day, I think your choice if you want to do that. But if there's some way of just curbing it a bit, so it's less. Yeah. Anyway, for that reason, I'll be voting for.
Councillor Allen.
Just very briefly, I'd speak also and support the reality of the increase in vaping, particularly among the young people, is amazing. It's exploding throughout the community. And to me, this is one important or two important ways of trying to push back on the reality of that. And it sort of sits the rationale behind those two measures sit very comfortably along things such as Class 4 gambling, such as the sale of alcohol, etc. So to me, it's in a very similar category, and I'll be supporting it.
Thank you. Being no further speakers, I'll start with you, Councillor Brannigan.
For.
Councillor Jennings.
Against.
In favour.
In favour.
Councillor Keto.
In favour.
In favour.
In favour.
In favour.
For. Mayor Burney.
In favour.
And I'm in favour. Thank you. That gives Mayor Burney direction for the AGM that I'm sure you'll all be attending here on live stream in council chambers. So I now need a mover and seconder to move our recommendations from 2.5 to 2.9 as voted for on block. Councillor Isaac, seconder. Councillor Allen, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Now, we have a Finance, Audit and Risk Committee meeting due to have started 15 minutes ago at 4 p.m. So, oh yeah, no, June for 5 minutes. We will take a 5-minute adjournment so that the Finance, Audit and Risk meeting can commence, and then they may agree to take an adjournment so that we can finish our meeting. And I'm just advised we don't need a resolution to adjourn the work, that I can call that. Okay, thank you.
Can I have everyone's attention quickly, please? Oh no, we've lost them. Oh, too late. Do I have a quorum? Don't run away, Joe. Councillor Mitchell, can you just take a seat for 30 seconds, please? So I'd like to open. Councillors. Yeah, I was going to say. Oh no. Yeah. So I'll open this Audit and Risk Committee, and then immediately adjourn it so council council meeting can continue. All right. So no, don't need to move in a second. No, didn't think so. All right, done.
Meeting to resume after council.
Yeah, meeting will resume after council meeting.
Great. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've got a quorum.
Okay. So I just,
Ruby's just got to say.
right, councillors, we're now resuming. Following that adjournment from Finance, Audit and Risk, and I now call the table back to order. We are now on to section 8 of the report, Customer Regulatory Services. I will be vacating the chair for Councillor Allen to deal with item 8.1. And Councillors Isaacs and Councillor Jennings are also moving from the table.
So page 41, councillors, is someone prepared to move 3.1, 3.2? Thank you, Councillor Bishop. Seconded, Councillor Brannigan. Those in favour say aye, against say no, it is carried. Welcome officers to the table. Oh, officers. Thank you, Lauren. Very quick. Over to you, Lauren.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councillors. So the item in front of you today is the decision on plan change for Tara Eco Growth Area. And I do have a few comments to make, but to start with, just wanted to respond to some of the matters raised by Mr. Rudd and hopefully clarify some of the aspects raised there. Particularly in terms of some of those procedural matters, such as the need for commissioners to notify submitters ahead of this being on council agenda. Now, to clarify, and this will hopefully be made clear when I move to speak to the item, that the decision that is on the table today is the decision for council to adopt this decision so that we can publicly notify submitters. Once we've done that, that will kick off that appeals period that Mr. Rudd referenced. And secondly, in relation to the discussion within the report about appeals being made to the Environment Court. Just to be clear, that is the statutory process outlined in the RMA and the only next step available should submitters not be happy with decisions made by the commissioners. To move on to the item itself, as I've indicated, the panel were independent and were delegated to make a decision on this plan change, which means that the decision on the table today is largely a procedural one that allows us to move forward to that next stage in the process and notify submitters officially that this decision has been made and open up that appeals period. The panel's decision, as indicated in the report, was to adopt the plan change, which allows much needed housing to be constructed, and as I've indicated, adopting allows us to move forward to that next step in the process. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? There appear to be none. Oh, that being the case, we have a recommendation of 4.4. No, where are we? Go back up. It's 3.3, isn't it? Yeah, 3.3. Is someone prepared to move? Councillor Kay Simmons moves. Is there a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Brannigan. Any discussion? There appears to be none. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, say no. It is carried. Thank you. And that is now, the meeting is now adjourned, I think. On that. Now, so look, just before I hand back over to Deputy Mayor Mason, could I just acknowledge Lauren and also the commissioners, which include Councillor Mason there, for what was an enormous piece of work and which signifies a reaction or a response to a huge period of growth in our district. So full acknowledgement and appreciation for the work above and beyond. Thank you very much. And I hand back over now to Deputy Mayor Mason.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Just noting that I have rejoined the table as Councillor Jennings and Councillor Isaacs, and observing that is quite a momentous endorsement for this plan change, which is significant. We are going to ask Mrs. Bennett to stay at the table because we now move on to our late item, which is report. I just want to get this right. Item, which will be item 8.2, but report A1, which is the Otaki to North Levin Highway letter of endorsement on detailed business case. In the late item on the agenda, you will see that the purpose of this is to recommend that Council endorse the Otaki to North Levin detailed business case and send the attached letter that is an appendix to this agenda item to Waka Kotahi, New Zealand Transport Agency, to support the detailed business case when it is presented to New Zealand Cabinet for final approval. Can I have a mover and seconder for 2.1 and 2.2 to bring this item onto the table? Councillor Isaacs, and a seconder, Councillor Jennings. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, welcome again, Ms. Bannock, and we now hand over to you to introduce the report. And again, acknowledge that we've got Mr. Haig away this evening. He typically would have sat alongside you with this report, but we welcome you.
Thank you very much. Now, as indicated in the report, Waka Kotahi will be soon presenting the Otaki to North Levin detailed business case to Cabinet for approval. And so just as a small point of clarification, the letter is addressed to Cabinet with a copy going to Waka Kotahi. So that is who the recipient of the letter will be. And probably just wanting to highlight that the scale and the significance of this project to our district means it's important that we take this opportunity to express our support for the project as a whole, and specifically the scale of the project as outlined in the detailed business case, being a 4-lane, 24-kilometre expressway highway between Otaki and Levin. Happy to answer any questions. Hopefully the context that we're considering here is clear, so keep it brief. I'll keep my comments brief, but that's really all I have to say on that.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Mrs. Bannock or of the Chief Executive in relation to this agenda item?
Just one point of clarification, and I think it's, I guess the question is, in supporting and in endorsing the DBC, I presume it doesn't remove our ability to advocate and support our constituents and our communities as they engage with Waka Kotahi through the process in terms of, that greater level of design in terms of mitigations and all of those other things that are obviously going to get down to a more detailed level with individual property owners and communities, particularly to our south. So, yeah.
That's correct. If Cabinet approves the detailed business case, that enables Waka Kotahi to move on to the next phase of the project, being the consenting phase, through the notice of requirement process and the various resource consent processes set out within the Resource Management Act. And through that process, and then subsequent processes that follow on from there, the detailed design, the really detailed understanding of effects and how those can be mitigated are understood. And through that process, there will in all likelihood be opportunities for submissions from affected property owners, from other parties, and for those to be considered through those decision-making processes.
Any further questions of the reporting officer? Okay. So we have then before us recommendation 2.3. That the Horowhenua District Council endorses the O2NL detailed business case and direct officers to send the attached letter of endorsement to Waka Kotahi prior to the detailed business case being submitted to Cabinet for final approval. Do I have a mover and seconder for this? Councillor Jennings, Councillor Brannigan. I now open the floor for questions or... we've had questions, haven't we? A further question, Councillor Jennings?
Yeah, if that's okay. I was just hoping to get some advice from the Chief Executive around a portion of the letter. So it's under the heading Executive Summary, the second paragraph in the final two sentences, where we're essentially flagging that we've got the detailed business case, but there are still some matters that need to be settled in terms of outside of the expressway route. And I just wondered whether the Chief Executive had any advice around whether we could potentially be a little bit stronger in some of the language in those two sentences. And yeah, if she had any recommendations.
Through the Deputy Mayor, I think what we're obviously trying to balance here is, the direct conversation that we're having with Waka Kotahi almost on a daily basis, and the message that we're wanting to send to government, which is a really clear endorsement for the project. In terms of your specifics around, is there some stronger language? So if we take those two last sentences where we say, as these do not form part of the O2NL DBC, they can be secured through other mechanisms and funding streams. Should Council resolve to endorse this letter, and maybe give me discretion to make some small edits, we could use some language that said something more along the lines of, as these do not form part of the O2NL DBC, you should be assured that Horowhenua District Council will be ensuring they are securing, so some language to demonstrate that it's not just about that they can be secured, but that we'll absolutely be working really hard to ensure they are secured.
So, Councillor Jennings and Councillor Brannigan, as the mover and seconder, would you be comfortable with the inclusion of minor edits of the CE being included as part of that recommendation?
Certainly, happy to support that. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Brannigan.
Yeah, just very briefly, I just want to acknowledge the huge amount of work that the team continues to put into this project, because it's hellishly important, as we all know, for many reasons. And I'll draw 3.2 to Council's attention. There's 72 deaths and serious injuries on that state highway over this period of time. And on a personal note, we lost two of our dearest friends on this road only a year ago. So for me, it's a bit of a passionate part of it. But we just seem to we continue to hope that we can vigorously support this project as much as we can. Make sure it stays on track and make sure it stays within timelines. Because how many more people are we going to need to lose before we get there? So, just that note, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brannigan. Mayor Burney.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Look, it's interesting, isn't it, and ironic that this matter is not considered significant in recommendation 2.2, but in fact is probably one of the most significant pieces of work that this council will ever see, and certainly in my lifetime. It's interesting that we've reached finally a milestone that we've been talking about for many, many years, in fact, and to have it off again, on again, on again, off again, and now hopefully get to the stage where Waka Kotahi and our other partners, iwi and ourselves, are pretty much aligned in terms of where we want to see this project going. We all know how important this project is to this region and, in fact, the wider district and the country, and will play a key role in the future development of everywhere in the bottom half of North Island. Many of the strategies that we have implemented over the last few years will, be only enforced by the passing of or the endorsement of this detailed business case, and we know how critical that is to a lot of the development of those strategies. We don't have to talk about the benefits for the local in terms of resilience and safety, but it's also that what it will do for the economic development of the whole country. I know there's a lot of work to do, but I urge Council to make sure that they fully support the endorsement of this detailed business case. Leave the government in no uncertain terms that, along with Waka Kotahi and our iwi partners, that this council wants to see this project delivered, and will do everything in its capabilities to do that and wants it delivered as soon as possible. So, fully support all the work that's been done, and I'd like to, in doing that, acknowledge the work that has been done in partnership with Waka Kotahi and our iwi partners in terms of this. It's come a long way in a long space of time, and I especially want to acknowledge Daniel Haig, Lauren, Dave McCorkadale and Brett McGuire and the amount of work that they have done over the last little while. But also want to acknowledge the community of Horowhenua, who have, in a lot of cases, put the interests of the community ahead of their own in terms of accepting that this project needs to be done. They see the wider benefits of it, and even though they may personally be impacted, they recognise that it does need to be completed. So I certainly ask Council to endorse that and respect the wishes of those in the community who want to see it done as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Burney. Councillor Bishop.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, fully endorse and support what the Mayor has just said. I think we've already voted in favour of this by a vote in the previous paper because they go hand in hand. And the impact of national spend on a significant piece of infrastructure which will unlock a huge area of our district into another phase of our existence is really exciting. Look, I also want to acknowledge the team here who have walked somewhat of a tightrope on behalf of our community and on behalf of us as elected members to a large degree, that the officers who have had to fight our corner and without any regard for what is best just for us, but best for the wider impact of the region. And I think it's reflected in the letter how, yes, we fully endorse this project, but that fine line, those 3 bullet points at the end, but hang on, we want this recorded. It's important. It's certainly been well signalled before, and as we learned last week, I think it was at a briefing, that we are playing a game where this needs to be recorded in some way, but without showing any disrespect to the total impact that this is going to have on our district. And I think we've got the balance pretty right. So well done to the team, and look forward to this adding some more weight to delivering the yes at Parliament.
Before we put this to the vote, I wondered if the CE had any further remarks she would like to make for the table.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and my apologies, Council. I probably should have highlighted this before you debated or shared your views, but I'm just conscious one of the things that we're aware of, but it's important that given the public are listening to this as well, that we don't lose sight of the pressures that the government will be under around cost, and therefore the options within the DBC. And so, in Council endorsing this letter, Council are endorsing the full scope of the project, and I wonder, and again with permission from the Council table, in proposing that at the end of the letter we do add an additional sentence that is quite clear about our strong preference for the recommended option. So that could read something like, Horowhenua District Council want to reiterate our support for the O2NL project and endorse the DBC. HDC has a strong preference for the recommended option, which is the only option that fully delivers an integrated set of improvements to safety and environmental outcomes, resilience and better lives for our communities in the wider region. As the DBC sets out, options that fit within the current cost envelope deliver fewer benefits, which will constrain the development of the region, placing a significant cost premium when completing the full scope later. So that's our way of saying to the government, we want them to do the whole project and do it once and do it right.
Thank you, Mrs. Davidson. To the mover and seconder, Councillor Jennings, Councillor Brannigan, do you accept
Yeah, absolutely.
that addition to the recommendation? Do we need to?
So I've added I've added to the recommendation just a short phrase in there saying that the Horowhenua District Council endorses the O2NL detailed business case and direct officers to send the attached letter of endorsement, including edits by the Chief Executive reflecting the wish of the Council to strengthen the language to Waka Kotahi prior to the detailed business case being submitted to Cabinet for final approval.
Mover and seconder happy with that? Is there any more discussion or debate on this matter? That said, I now put recommendation with those amendments 2.3. All those in favour? Against? All those carried unanimously? Carried unanimously. Fantastic. And I just want to summarise that this is really is quite a momentous day. There have been, I think, as Mayor Wandin pointed out, decisions that don't register under the Local Government Act as significant, but register for our council as significant, and in particular, unanimous endorsement of this letter of support of the detailed business case to Waka Kotahi is an important decision. We've been well briefed. We know the significant work that's gone in, and I do acknowledge the team at council, but particularly Mr. Haig, Mr. Baddock, Mr. Maguire and Mr. McCorkindale, who have tirelessly championed and driven this work and the significant work, and that alignment with Waka Kotahi, Horowhenua District Council and iwi is something that we should be proud of and look forward to a result once the detailed business case goes through the next phase. That said, we have, thank you, to the table completed the business of this extraordinary meeting this evening. It went somewhat over time, but I do appreciate there were significant items before us, and thank you, Mayor Burney, for your presence via Zoom. I'm sure you'll be looking forward to getting back and taking the reins, but it's been a privilege to sit here before you all today. I'll ask Councillor Keto if he could close our meeting today with a karakia, and we will move directly into the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee meeting. Move directly into Finance, Audit and Risk. Councillor Keto, thank you.
Tēnā koutou ki ino i tātou. E te atua e kaharawa kei te whakamoimiti mātou ki i tēnei rā. Nei rā, te wahanga matariki hei mui a tātou. Uhia mai te koro mai aroha ki a tātou, te tātou whānau, kei rau te koro mai. Whiti whati ma whakamaua ki a tīna na haumi e hui e ki ora tātou.
I didn't feel it was well said. I was bloody getting a bit.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let's reconvene this Finance, Audit and Risk Committee meeting. And Councillor Robert, would you like to say the opening karakia, please? Having just closed one, you can. Thank you, Councillor Robert.
E blessing anō tērā, nō reira I tatua, kei a mātou e inoi ki a koe anō, mō te hui nei me te ki tō tātou kaunihere. Tēnei te mihi aro ki a koe, tēnā koutou e te iwi, me tō tātou whānau hei moe a tātou. Kei te mihi atu ki a koutou, kei te mihi atu ki a koe te atua ki a tātou katoa, te ato whai a tō tātou reke au hiukoreiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiringa tahitanga I te wairua tapu, ake, aumene. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Councillor Robert. Now, just calling for apologies. I think Mayor Burney is still online, so we don't. You're still there? Yep. All right. Thank you, Mayor Burney. Also, I'll just quickly go through the procedural matters, then I'll just, if I can, change the order of the agenda. We've got Stephen Lucy, our Audit New Zealand Director, on the screen. Item 6.4. So what we'll do is we'll do the procedural issues, and then we will do the item of the audit management report. There are no apologies. Public participation. Viv Bold. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome.
Welcome, thank you. A lot to take in on those two agendas. Okay, mainly to do with the report, the audit report, if I can. Thank you to the audit report for showing us last year the reality of council not leaving paper trails and minutes. Example, Tifina Lewis. Gosh, should I take this off? Sorry. Example, Tifina Lewis speaking to the council about meetings and payments not taking place down at his Manukau marae. There was no paper trail to be found, and he was really upset about it. It happened on the night of the audit release. On page 48 of your audit, sir, the landfill review. This was an excellent review of appropriateness of discount values used for the accuracy of calculations. Example of that came to mind was valuation of expenses set 3 years ago. Page 93, excuse me if I skip around, but it's easier than trying to pick up the document all the time. 93, very pleased to see the audit risk issues now brought into calculations. I feel David Wright has been very helpful putting this register on the table in the public view. Page 45, complaints performance needing to have more transparency addressed though. 24-hour service is broken with little feedback through PAMI when the 12 hours is finished down here. Requests, questions and answers. They're not being shown in the public to what the questions have been asked and answers. Many of them might not be doubled up on if they were put out there in a website that the public could actually access. Official complaints don't seem to be replied to. We found this when the flooding happened out at Hokio. Many of Hokio people ran into the office, but none of the roading man never got back to them. You could see a little bit until Lauren came up about Tairika. I too also was annoyed at the fact that the result of the commission inquiry was just put out in 3 days for the public notice as far as the hard copy goes, because it felt as though it was a bit like the blueprint mandate that was put out an agenda for 3 days beforehand and then adopted. But listening to Lauren, she was saying that no, it was just being put out so that they could then send it out to people, because I must admit the notice that only came through was that we had got it prepared. As far as we were concerned, this is very political and not best practice. Page 91, risk management. These are some of the things that we are concerned about at Hokio maybe. At Waipehu. There's no new consent for the Hokio stream being looked at since 2018. No new consent for stormwater and sediment control since 2001. No new review of policy and procedures of land review not done on the 2020 year as per consent with the NLG.
No climate change policies made, still on the table since 2021. Waste minimisation policy still on the table since 2019. Horizons and HDC say only talk with MTA and the Rakawa iwis, but we both know that this information isn't flowing through to all of them. So therefore, no communication and lack of transparency problems. Bernie, I thought you might have been here, but anyway, on FEGO last night, it was reported that councils have an immediate welfare fund that they can tap into. So I thought next time Hokio gets flooding for 3 weeks and we need the bus to get into the food, you could maybe tap into this. And you also mentioned tonight about the fact that the rates increase was lower than inflation. Well, Sue-Ann just Googled that and the inflation rate is 6.9. Yes? No questions? No.
Thank you. Thank you, Viv. Late items. There are no late items. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest for items on the agenda? Next item is confirmation of our minutes held 25th of May. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor David. Seconded, we'll be careful here, Member Brian. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Announcements. Are there any announcements? Yep. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to announce tonight it won't officially go on the website until probably tomorrow. But this afternoon I had a discussion with Standard & Poor's, who do our annual credit rating, and I'm pleased to inform you that we were successful in receiving a credit rating upgrade. So we've moved from A+ to AA-. The key reason for that, they indicated, was around our liquidity management. So what that means is that what we have been doing, our policy is to try and make sure that we're securing debt in advance of when it's becoming due. So for example, for next year, we have already set in place or pre-funded, as they call it, the debt that we need that will become due next year. So that's one of the key policies and was the reason why we moved last year to a positive outlook. So that's a good move for us in terms of moving into the AA-. So what that will mean for us from a practical perspective is, as well as when we go and borrow money, it will be effectively 5 basis points cheaper for us.
All right, I think that's a good news story, and may the good news continue for the rest of the meeting. Okay. Right. So if we can then move, to page 35, item 6.4. We've got Mr. Lucy on Zoom. Welcome, Stephen. We've got your audit report on your management letter in front of councillors and members. Is there any highlights you would like to raise? Maybe I should refer to. Stephen, if you'd like to, any items you'd like to highlight in front of for the members of the committee?
I'll just make a couple quick comments because I will take it as read. One, as you'll note on page 39, the draft was only provided on 6th of May, which is just over 4 months after the accounts were signed. So apologies for that. We were snowed with work. I know that doesn't make life easier for you, but the game plan, as Jacinta and Philip have continued to remind me, and I fully acknowledge, is to get these reports to you earlier. So therefore, it's in a better cycle, getting it and discussing it now 6 months after the year. In fact, tomorrow will be the year end for the following year. So clearly the game plan is to get these sorts of reports to you earlier in the piece where we can. It's not through lack of diligence on our part. We just don't have the staff, bluntly. But notwithstanding that, the game plan is still to get these things to you earlier in the piece. I haven't seen the management comments before. I've just had a glance before. I see there are a couple of instances where there's disagreement, black and white disagreement between management and us. So we'll have a conversation with Jacinta and whoever else following this to make sure that we understand that we're not talking past each other. And then the other thing that I just wanted to note was I see that on page 67 there's comments about Palmerston North City Council having changed the way that they're recording stuff. So it looks like partway through the financial year it may be that we're able to resolve that issue. That will still affect part of the financial year, so you may still end up with a qualification for the current financial year finishing tomorrow. But if those changes have been made, that means going forward, if those things address the issues that we've raised, that means that you'd get back to a normal situation of getting an unqualified or a normal, for lack of a better word, audit report. And the only other key thing is there was a prior period adjustment because of a revaluation, which highlights the point that we're living in. You've mentioned in one of the earlier comments about rates and the CPI. Well, the size of asset increases and construction cost increases are obviously reasonably horrific over the last year, 18 months or so. That does have an impact on how easy it is to do fair value assessments to assess whether the value of your key infrastructure is materially correct. And that was highlighted in this particular example where council in the previous year had reached a view that there was no need for an adjustment for one of its asset classes. When the valuation was actually undertaken for 1 July, it ended up with a significant change, which meant that actually, based on those indices, the numbers hadn't been right. That's not to reflect poorly on management or indeed ourselves, because we looked at that stuff at the time. But it does show you how pure reliance on indices isn't necessarily the answer at this stage. So it is about making sure that recent construction costs and the like are taken into account when doing those sorts of assessments. So it's a difficult time in terms of reaching judgments about what the appropriate valuation of infrastructure assets in particular are. And I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Jacinta, do you want to make any comments as reporting officer?
Sure. Thank you, Stephen, and through you, Mr. Chair. I think I did note 2 comments in relation to what Mr. Lucy said around the valuations. So because effectively our water assets was the key one that changed significantly, what we are doing this year is revaluing that class of assets again, just to make sure that from a valuation perspective for audit purposes, that it's as timely and accurate as it can be. So while that does mean we incur some more costs this year in terms of valuation, it does mean that from an audit perspective and probably from a planning for LTP amendment perspective, that we've got our cost index as appropriate as it can be. Also in regards to the report, you'll note that while there are a lot of items on the report, it's not, the report wouldn't be indicated as our proudest moment. I think we are on a process of continual improvement, and we are striving for this, for December when we sign off the report. Our next annual report is to make sure that we've cleared, if we can, everything off that list so that we can have a very short audit report ongoing into the future, so that we can form a good relationship with audit in terms of the timing of when the report is finished, and also making sure as part of finalizing the audit that all of the items from the last year are cleared off as part of that process. So we'll see a timely report with as much clear as we can by the end of December.
Thank you. Member Jackson.
Chairman, just for my education, on page 41, under benchmarks, there is the comment that we did not exclude deferred revenue. And in a normal business sense, that would be in your debtors and be in your balance sheet, as I understand it. and I just wondered why that is there. I see it says it's part of regulation, but I just can't quite understand it.
In terms of the benchmarks that the government set, it's a technicality in terms of what they want included in the liabilities or not. So from our perspective, we hadn't got the technical accounting 100% right.
If we had a large amount owing by NZTA, for instance, and we would invoice them, does that still stay in our system, or does that have to be excluded at the end of a financial year?
At the end of the financial year, if we haven't effectively earned it, we may have invoiced it, but if we haven't earned it, then effectively it would be booked as deferred revenue.
Just in terms of the reval, is there a rate impact on that, or is that just funded through normal budgets?
So the cost of the revaluation itself, there is a cost impact for that. So I don't know the exact amount. It might be about 40,000 in terms of the cost of the revaluation. But I think because we are completing we are working towards an LTP amendment, that it does make good sense to make sure that we've got everything nailed down in terms of the costs.
Are there any other questions, comments? As Chair, Councillor Mitchell, sorry.
Oh, thank you. I was just on a positive note. I was just going to note that the Appendix 1, the status of previous recommendations, basically most of them are being cleared and fine, and so you're also assuring us that this past year's ones probably most of them will be cleared by the end of the year. So I actually think that we're doing very well in that space.
Thank you, Councillor Christine. I mean, I've got an observation. If we actually look at our work program, and I know we're out of sync in terms of the agenda, we would note that we're going to expect an update in September in terms of the progress. So I'm encouraged that management are confident that we're on the upward trend in terms of improvement, and I think that's a good message for the committee to receive, and it's the role of this committee then to actually monitor that as part of that, and as part of that resolution. There are probably some items in there, as Mr. Lucy has referred to, that there might be some disagreement between, and there always is. Don't want to. Auditors are only issue an opinion, and I also have an opinion, and we sometimes agree to disagree. And I can see Mr. Lucy smiling there, so that's all good. It's actually having that in a constructive way, and sometimes as a committee we might agree with Audit New Zealand and direct staff to do something, or we might say, no, we actually agree with staff and what they're doing is sufficient and we're prepared to accept the risk. So I think that will be a good discussion to have in September, not today. Are there any other further comments or questions?
Yeah, just a couple. On page 50 of the agenda, which is 14 of the document, number 3, the Alliance contract, which has reached its anniversary this month, and under the management comment says that Council and Alliance partners are carrying out a full review. And then the last sentence reads, the new performance framework will be embedded in the extension agreement. How I read or understand that is that operations is obviously going to undertake that, but will that come back to Council or governance before it's signed off?
Excuse me, through the chair, that will be brought back to a council briefing early August.
Second, and can I just say thank you to our chief executive who gave this document to us, I'd have to say, in advance to it being in the agenda, which I appreciate, and there was an honest conversation about, it's not our proudest moment, so things that are highlighted through here around matters outstanding and matters ongoing, I'm comforted because we've had that conversation earlier, and you've reiterated that tonight. Thank you, Jacinta. But I know you've covered this, but I just need some reassurance. This is page 52 because key matters, which there was a couple that benchmark one which you raised, Independent Brian Jackson, but the valuation stuff, the timing, and the management comment reads, "We will consider moving that forward." But to me, consider is not "we will," and yet we're coming up with this error frequently due to that timing. I just can you give me some certainty that it's not going to be ongoing?
Sure. So there are a number of councils that continue to value as of 1 July. There isn't a requirement to value either 1 July or 30 June. Because there have been significant cost changes in the markets, though, that's proving more difficult. So absolutely, I can give you certainty in terms of the Three Waters assets. For example, we made a decision that to provide more certainty, we have moved that to 30 June. So we have shifted the date on where we value now based on that guidance to 30 June. So that eliminates any issue in that area going forward.
Cool, because it's clearly articulated page 52 around the risks to council, and I just needed to be sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Probably at the time of writing the report, we were still working through whether that was possible. So we've been working with WSP as the external advisors to make sure that we could do that. But in the last couple of weeks, it's been made more certain.
And my last thing, and you're welcome to say no, it's none of your business. But on page 54, where we talk about asset register, sometimes, well, at least for me, I can read that and I don't fully get it because I don't know what it looks like. How, and for example, the asset registers are being moved into RAM, which is obviously a system, and we've had demonstrations from IT before around this is how we do this, and then it all makes sense. And so when we're at the table, it's easier to got and but I don't know what that means. I'm reading it, but I'm like, okay, I'll just. So if there was a possibility, and this is where you can say mind your business, to see this in action, so that as I read this, I fully get it, because I guess I don't. When we talk about asset management plans and all that, which is critical for council to fully understand, I can't recall the last time we've seen that stuff, and this is my 9th year, and I just would really like to, finally get it, like, fully. And the last thing is just for a level of appreciation is we're not experts at, like, council's a beast, and we have massive departments and activities, and it's all moving at the same time. And yet we sit here and we make decisions and budgets on every single one, and we're having to, it's not always about trade-off, and without waffling, but cemeteries, roading, like playgrounds, equipment, and libraries, and it's just, it all comes back to this, and I just would like to, for myself, because I do intend to stand again, I want to do this better. Like we should be improving too, so that we can make better decisions and improve it, like all of us.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I think in terms of maybe I'll just be careful. We need to be careful in terms of using acronyms. I've just realised we didn't explain that well. So just I'll make it clear quickly in relation. So RAM is the asset management software that's used across New Zealand for roading. It's a well-used and well-respected piece of software that NZTA endorse, and it's used because it has good access for contractors to be able to put information in and for the council to be able to use, update any asset-related information in that roading space. It's also used in a number of councils for other asset classes as well. In this particular instance for our council, the decision was made to try and bring some of the assets related to the three waters into RAM, and that was made from an efficiency perspective in terms of making sure we were having the most cost-effective asset management tool that we could. So if it was good and it could be used for waters as well, then it made good sense to bring that in because it is a really good piece of software that is used already across New Zealand and has been used at this council for roading. So as part of the long-term plan process, amendment process, when we are discussing asset management for you, I definitely think we can, through that conversation, make it a bit more visible how we work through and use software as part of the asset management planning process, so it is a bit more clear for you. But in terms of the RAM, just to give you an indication there, that's what that is, and it was made again from a cost efficiency and also from a general efficiency perspective to try and, if we can use one product where we can for everything and make it more efficient, we will.
Thank you. Yeah, I wonder why we're having known what RAM is, why we're using it for water, but you've explained. You've taken about one of my questions, thank you, which I was going to ask you offline. Thank you for that. Are there any other comments, questions on this report? There are none. I would actually therefore like to move one that we receive this report, but in terms of a couple of other recommendations, and my learned friend to my left has already received these with the typos, but I'll read them out without the typos. That the committee acknowledges the recommendations made by Audit New Zealand, so we're saying yes, we acknowledge them, but we also agree, and the management responses. So we're actually saying yes, we're acknowledging both the recommendation and the responses from the staff. And also the second additional recommendation is that the committee also notes that a number of the recommendations could have been resolved earlier, and I think Mr. Lucy's talked about that earlier, if the management report had been received in a timely manner. And I'm just referring so that we could have actually resolved some of these previously, and I think that's important that we actually record that as part of the resolution. And then the last one is that, again, the decision is recognised as not being significant. So I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Member Bryan. Any discussion? Questions on the resolution? All those in favour, please say aye. As against, carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen. You can put. Oh, one other question I have for the committee. My apologies, and it's under 4.2 on page 35. There is the ability for, and it's the right of this committee to meet with the auditors without council officers. We won't do it now, but is there any appetite from this committee to do so? No, not at this stage. Councillor Jennings, I can see you wavering.
Yeah, I think there'd be some merit in doing. Yeah.
Okay, so we will schedule that at an appropriate time. All right. Will we? Can the chair also say it's actually considered good practice? We might do as part of this meeting. Mr. Lucy's looking. He might tell us everything was well. Right? That's his prerogative.
I think it's a good process. It's not that there's anything that I wouldn't raise with management, and it'd be pretty rare. But notwithstanding, I think it's good governance practice for at least once a year.
Okay, might take 5 minutes, might take 5 hours. Let's not draw any conclusions. You all right? Sorry? Right. Thank you. You can either stay or leave. Thank you for your contribution, Mr. Lucy.
Thank you all. I will leave on this occasion. I'll have when I next catch up with you, Mr. Chair. I'm keen to attend these as they're scheduled throughout the year, and certainly for the risk aspects of them, it's because it is quite helpful as part of our audit to understand how council is addressing those at a governance level. So that's to say that in future I would look to observe going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so if we go back in the agenda to page 7, item 6.1, we've got our committee actions monitoring report. Taken as read.
Take it as read and happy to take any questions.
No questions. Can I have a mover for the recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Todd. Seconded, Councillor Joe. All those in favour, please say aye. This against carried. Next item, 6.2, page 11, our work programme.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. The only item I would comment on was some conversation in regards to the item 17, which was the Audit New Zealand Management Report, coming through to the August meeting rather than September. So it came through as part of the pre-briefing today, and we're happy to do that.
And also I note that in the audit management letter there are a number of policies. The sensitive expenditure, fraud and conflict of interest will also be brought back to this committee before September for final recommendation to council. Councillor Jennings.
Just a question around, I guess we've obviously just been through the Audit New Zealand report, which has a series of recommendations. Later in the agenda, we've got the internal audit project from last year, the report from last year, which has a number of recommendations. We have things like council mark recommendations. And so my question is how do we map or I guess check where there may be some overlap with all those recommendations, and also have we got a centralised tool for like a centralised recommendation to-do list, or are we still sort of segmenting them into these different sort of parts? Because again, like say take council mark recommendations, I'm uncertain as to the vehicle for progressing those. Is it this committee? Is it ordinary council? How are we actually making sure that we are managing and addressing those recommendations alongside the myriad of other recommendations we get through other channels?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Councillor Jennings. I hear what you're saying. If you don't mind, if you leave it with me, I think there is something that we can definitely do. Based on what you're saying, it makes good sense that, particularly in regards to committee specific, that we can try and combine them, but have some sort of indication within the various, within the monitoring report of where they're coming from, but trying to keep them in one place to make it a little bit easier.
Can I make a suggestion then that we actually put that on our monitoring report as an action theatre, so we don't forget, right? But with everything else that's going on, right? It's very easy for us to forget at the moment, and then we can. It might not be action next month. It might be action further down the track, but at least we've got a plan in progress.
Maybe if it's okay if I ask, in terms of the with the focus on the annual report and things during July and August, if we could make it a September item, then that would give the team a little bit more time to make sure.
Yeah. So if we go back to, and where's my 6.2, page 11, we've got a recommendation there. Do I have a mover? I'll move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Todd. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. As against, carried. 6.3, page 17, financial report. Chief Financial Officer.
So I'm going to pass over to our Manager of Financial Planning and Reporting, Abraham, to introduce this report today.
Welcome, Abraham.
Good afternoon or good evening, I'm not sure if that changes over. So I take the report as read, but I just probably want to highlight a few key things in the report. So we completed $24.9 million as of the 31st of May, compared to our budget of 57.7, but we forecast the end of this financial year to be at 28.8 million. Further along, so we have an operating surplus deficit variance compared to our forecast of about $2.7 million. But if you take out things that are going to be loan funded or reserve funded, that deficit comes down to about 663,000. Things, for example, like the hockey turf, they're going to be funded by reserves. The district plan and the solid waste were agreed to be loan funded, so those extra costs are going to be loan funded. And then also we have the tornado and storm emergency response, which is going to be funded out of borrowings. And of that 663,000, I guess the main driver behind that is the increase in professional services and maintenance costs. So under professional services, we had the interim CE being paid for out of that, and also the final iwi resourcing payments were paid out of that instead of it being capitalised as they were previously. And then we had additional maintenance costs in our water supply, mainly due to results of weather events. And that's my summary of the report. I had to take any questions.
Just on page 21, Abraham, we've got tornado and storm emergency response, and it needs a decision on how that's funded, and I guess our recommendation will come, but there's bits and pieces right through our accounts on storm and other damage, and I just wondered at some stage if we could have a one-pager just detailing what that all adds up to. Yes, yeah, thank you.
Councillor Sam?
This might actually be a question for the Chief Executive, if that's all right. And it relates to page 20 with the reference to the iwi resourcing payments. And the question I have is, and actually it sort of sparked some interest, a comment from Ms. Bold, and obviously the CKS audit report being in the agenda. We had a briefing probably about a year ago, I'd say, from the former Chief Executive around how iwi resourcing payments are structured. And the impression I was given at that point was that those were managed through capital program budgets. So I was a little bit surprised to see the reference here to operational expenditure. Are you able to either talk to it today, or perhaps could we potentially, if there's support around the table, perhaps schedule a briefing to get your understanding and your assessment of how that funding is delivered. And just, I guess the context is that, again, Council Mark and the CKS report in the agenda do talk about a sort of a revisiting of those agreements, and that's certainly something that has been on my radar and I've raised previously, and I understand that that's probably also on the CEO's radar as well. So yeah, so it's either can you answer that question today, or could we perhaps schedule a briefing if there was support?
Through you, Chair, I think scheduling a briefing and providing elected members an update on that is timely, and it's something that Mayor Wandin had already requested. It's just finding that in the schedule. But at a high level, the agreements in place don't always align to a capital project, and so therefore we can't put costs against a project. We can't capitalise a cost where it's not associated with a capital project. And so what you see in this instance is where those costs very much do fall on the operational arm of the business. But we'll work on a briefing for elected members on that.
Any other questions? Just clarification. So we're talking about additional borrowings for a number of projects, plus we're talking about that rates deficit of 600k. So we're really, in terms of our net borrowing, excluding capital, if we did all our capital, we would actually have to borrow an extra 2.7 million. Is that correct? So that's probably the number we're actually talking about in terms of increased borrowing. Thank you. Yeah.
Just in terms of that 600,000 figure, just as part of finalising the ledger for this year, we are conscious we haven't done that final review of maintenance. There has been some significant maintenance needed in our three water space this year, and as part of finalising our year, we haven't yet got the certainty around. Sometimes maintenance can get classified, renewals can get classified in the maintenance space. So we do need to do that detailed review to make sure that we've got that split right between what is maintenance and what is renewals. So just to clarify that we haven't done that detailed review yet. So this is an indication based on what's gone through continuing to sit in the operational space. So there may be a little bit of movement because the costs that have come through from the Alliance were a little bit higher than we anticipated. And so as part of finalising our year, we will be doing that review just to make sure.
Thank you for that heads up. So can I have a mover for the recommendation on page 17? Thank you, Councillor Christine. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Sam. All those in favour, please say aye. As against, carried. Our next item is... Councillor Brannigan?
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Chair, I was just remiss in not declaring a conflict of interest in that item in relation to the emergency management component of it. So, yeah, in retrospect, thank you.
.5, page 91.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to introduce you all to Ben Blyden, who is our procurement advisor. I will start off introducing the report, and then I'll pass it over to Ben to discuss the procurement element of it. And you will be, as part of this evening, we will also be having a further workshopping session or briefing around procurement. So some of the detailed questions you may want to talk about now, or you may wish to talk about a little bit later as well. But in terms of the risk management status report, we are intending, as you'll see, this report to be a broad report that discusses all elements of risk and how we are working to address them. So you'll see that we have the risk, key strategic risks mentioned in there, and all of the work that's happening with the procurement space at the moment. So that's the focus of the report at the moment, because that has been the focus of the work for this team at this stage. So I'll pass it over to Ben to introduce that side of it, and then we'll go from there.
Welcome, Ben. So if we just deal with procurement to begin with, then we might circle back and talk about the risk report at the end. Welcome again, Ben. Floor's yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Obviously, the discussion in the agenda gives a quite clear outline of what has come with the two main reports that have been done. Just a couple points out of that. Obviously, the initial report was done by CKS in 2021. That covered about 50 different procurements that were completed in the financial year of 2018 and 19. The report was delayed due to COVID-19, so that's why it was produced so late. Overall, that gave about 8 different recommendations. Brilliant. That's better. So it gave 8 different recommendations, lots of different points, but 8 base recommendations. One of those was to have a central procurement function in terms of procurement advisory, and that's where I've come along since January. Since then, to follow on from that audit, we basically went out to get consultants, a consultant firm called Horowhenua, to do a gap analysis on our procurement process, and they focused mainly on just the process and our documentation, not necessarily what had been done previously, but going forward, where we could go. So, within this the gap analysis, they actually conducted some interviews with approximately 14 of our staff, which got their point of view on what was actually going on. So rather than just what was on paper, they got it from the floor. Between the interviews and looking at our documentation, they came up with a total of 17 recommendations, which come under the categories of gaps, improvements, and opportunities. From both the CKS audit completed in 2021 and the Horowhenua gap analysis produced in May 2022, that has influenced us to introduce a procurement framework, which includes the introduction of procurement strategy, which we haven't had before, and update and refresh of our procurement policy. The replacement of the procurement manual for the introduction of procurement guidelines for our staff. We're going to update our procurement templates and add some additional ones to make the process nice and smooth, and refresh our training for our staff. There's a brief timeline within the discussion in the agenda, and obviously we have our briefing later on. If you have any further questions.
Are there any questions? Councillor Wayne, I can see you champing. If you're champing at the bit. Councillor Sam.
Welcome on board, and thanks. I think it's great that we've got, I guess, that sort of centre of subject matter expertise in this space, and really pleased to see the direction of travel in terms of the work that's being achieved. I guess my question, it might be a little bit unfair for you given you're just recently on board, so feel free to defer to the CEO, but in terms of what's in the agenda, like as a summary for the public listening in, essentially what we're saying is that the procurement policy that is in place, that has been the direction that's been set around this table through the policy, that's reasonably sound. Like that's good, and that the work that's being undertaken is really in the practice space, and the tools, and actually how we do it, and the checks and balances we have in terms of actually giving effect and implementing that policy. Is that sort of a fair assessment or overview?
Yes and no. So the policy itself is quite sound. It's got some good points in it. It does need to be expanded, and that's one of the things that has been identified. And yeah, to your other part of the question, yes, the practices conducted by the staff do need to be brushed up a little bit more. That's not to say that everything has been done incorrect, because it hasn't. There's just little points that the I's dotted, the T's crossed, all that needs to be done to not only protect our staff, but protect the organisation itself.
Any other questions? I'm looking forward to the briefing. I am a big fan of having councillors develop a procurement strategy which sets the overall direction, and then having a policy. As part of that policy, and I'll put my cards on the table now, Monique, the Chief Executive, has already heard them, that sometimes, a policy is great, but often we need to go outside of policy. So the policy should actually include what's the procedure and reporting where we actually go outside of policy. Then in terms of, and that's where governance actually stops, right? We obviously need reporting on it, but the procurement guidelines manual, that is the domain, in my opinion, clearly of the Chief Executive. We need to know there is one, we need to know it's robust, but that's clearly the Chief Executive's domain. And I look forward to the briefing. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. No other questions on procurement? Right. Our risk framework. Now, I understand Ashley would have been here, but she's probably suffering the same ailment as His Worship the Mayor. Do you want to make any comments?
Probably no specific comments at this stage. I guess in terms of the risk area, we are, once we get some resource on board in this space, we hope to progress this a little bit further. So we got some help from Aon to get started. We've got the key risks and strategic risks identified. Once we've got some resource to assist us, we'll get this going a lot quicker than it is at the moment.
Thank you for that. Are there any comments from the committee on the key risks that are highlighted on page 93 through to 97? I would say that the top risk there is facing, for those who don't know, I sit on 9 or 10 committees similar to this. It's top of mind of 9 of the top 10. The other one committee that doesn't have that problem is fully staffed, but as the Chief Executive knows, they actually have significant other issues facing that community, with probably the most expensive power in the world at the moment due to their sole reliance on diesel. If anyone wants to know any more details, they can quiz me in the dinner break. Just a clarification of the Chief Executive. So going forward, I think it would be really good if we actually probably talk about these in subsequent meetings in a bit more detail. I think would be probably useful if we could actually schedule that, just putting it out there for everybody. All right, any further comments, Monique?
Through the chair, I was just going to suggest that how I've seen it work well in the past is kind of for each committee meeting, we might schedule a bit of a deep dive on one of the risks. We are in a briefing process. Elected members can have a really free and frank conversation about what is the risk, how are we mitigating that risk. So certainly, like if that's if there's a desire on the council table, it's something I would encourage.
It was just a question through you, Chair, to the Chief Executive, I guess, around the resourcing of actually addressing the risks, because obviously some of these will be viewed as a cost, but others will be viewed as an investment actually in, obviously getting a better outcome. And so, as an example, I see there time spent to reach agreement between Council and Wakatahi. We know that one thing through that O2NL exercise is that all of our staff effort is unfunded at the moment it's not funded by Waka Kotahi, so that's having to be funded by local ratepayers. And so I guess my question is just at this point, based on what's been put in this table, are you confident that you have the resources right now through approved budgets that obviously this governance table controls to address what's in front of you right now?
At this stage, I don't think I've got enough information to be able to give the committee that level of confidence. I think we're in a very early phase of understanding the risks and therefore the strategies we're employing to mitigate them. Hopefully in the next couple of months that's something I can give more assurances on.
Is there any further questions? Right, we've got a recommendation on page 91. Do I have a mover? I'll move. Go to seconder, Councillor Sam. All those in favour, please say aye. Is against, carried. Last item, page 187, 6.6, our health and safety quarterly update. Welcome, Tanya. We'll take your report as read. Are there any highlights or further information you want to bring to the committee?
Evening, Chair, councillors, members. The only part I would like to say is that it's been really good to be able to engage in some more training for our staff on health and safety. The movement within the COVID restrictions has opened that up, so that has been a really positive part as far as health and safety goes from me. Apart from that, there's nothing else to add for the report at the moment. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No questions. Do I have a mover for the recommendation on page 187? Thank you, Councillor Sam. Seconded. Thank you, Councillor David. All those in favour, please say aye. Is against, carried. Now, last item, we need to move into public excluded. I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ross. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Take a break for 30 seconds while we stop live streaming.